Just mind. Just reveled in the newfound power he held over Hyania, his every whim executed with ruthless efficiency. Yet, amid the corridors of authority, the haunting specter of his past love, Rayi, still clung to the recesses of his tormented heart. In a chamber adorned with opulence, just succumbed to a dark reflection. The velvet drapes, the ornate tapestries, the golden fixtures, none of these could shield him from the shadow that loomed over his soul. His mind drifted back to a time when his love for Rayi was pure and unbridled, a time before power and ambition had turned his heart to stone. The images of their shared moments invaded his thoughts, clashing violently with the monstrous deeds he had committed in her name. The memory was a paradox, a twisted dance between love and cruelty, beauty and horror, a reminder that the line between passion and obsession was perilously thin. One haunting recollection stood out among the rest. Just recalled the horror he had unleashed upon Rayi, a moment that had forever tainted the memory of their love. In a fit of madness, driven by a desire to possess her completely, he had consumed her flesh, savoring the taste of his once beloved. The act itself was a macabre manifestation of his broken love, a grotesque display of possessiveness that defied reason. It was as if he had sought to make her a part of him, to bind her spirit to his in a way that transcended life and death. Yet, even as he remembered the act with revulsion, a perverse fondness lingered, an unsettling echo of the love that had soured into madness. Just struggled with conflicting emotions, his present cruelty clashing with the remnants of love still buried deep within. He had loved Rayi with a passion that bordered on the divine, and yet, in his desperation to hold onto that love, he had destroyed the very thing he cherished most. Hatred had now consumed his heart, a hatred born from the ashes of his love for Rayi. In a fit of rage, he ordered his trusted subordinates to apprehend all those connected to her, her relatives, her friends, anyone who had known her in life. They were unjustly subjected to brutal executions, unaware of the reasons behind their arrest and subsequent demise. Their anguished screams reverberated through the air, silenced only by the ominous grip of just dark rule. The echoes of their suffering filled the chamber, mingling with just twisted thoughts. He reveled in the power he wielded, relishing the fear and despair he inflicted upon his subjects. But beneath the facade of strength, a profound emptiness gnawed at his soul. The more he exerted his control, the more hollow he felt, as if each act of cruelty drained a part of his humanity. Rayi's face haunted him, her memory a constant reminder of the love he had lost and the darkness he had embraced. In moments of solitude, when the weight of his actions bore down upon him, he would find himself longing for her presence, yearning for the innocence and purity that had once defined their relationship. Her laughter, her smile, the way she looked at him with eyes full of trust and love, these memories were both a solace and a torment. But those moments were fleeting, drowned out by the cacophony of violence and cruelty that surrounded him. Jess had become a prisoner of his own making, trapped in a cycle of destruction and despair from which there seemed to be no escape. The kingdom he ruled was one of fear and suffering, a reflection of the turmoil that raged within him. The more he tried to bury the past, the more it resurfaced, like a wound that refused to heal. As he gazed upon the opulent surroundings of his chamber, Jess felt a twinge of remorse, a fleeting glimpse of the man he once was, before power and ambition had consumed him. He remembered a time when his dreams were noble, when he had sought to build a better world, not destroy it. But that man was gone, lost to the darkness that now ruled his soul. The remorse was quickly extinguished by the cold, unrelenting grip of tyranny. Jess had come too far, committed too many atrocities, to turn back now. He was a king, a ruler, a god in the eyes of his subjects, and gods did not bow to their own emotions. But even as he reassured himself of his power, the doubt lingered, a small but persistent voice that whispered of the love he had lost and the price he had paid. With a heavy heart and a mind clouded by darkness, Jess turned his gaze away from the memories that haunted him, burying them deep within the recesses of his tortured soul. In the silence of the chamber, he was left alone with his thoughts, a prisoner of his own making, condemned to rule over a kingdom built on fear and suffering. Yet, in the depths of his despair, Jess could not help but wonder, was it truly power that he had sought, or had it always been Rayi? And if it was her he longed for, what had he become in her absence? These questions gnawed at him, driving him deeper into the abyss of his own making. As the night wore on, and the shadows in the chamber grew longer, Just realized that he could no longer tell where the darkness ended and he began. The silent uprising. As the dust settled after years of relentless warfare, Ruda stood victorious, having fulfilled his childhood dream of uniting the fractured continent under a single banner. The cost, however, was measured in the blood of hundreds of thousands of lives and the erosion of democratic ideals. With his rise to power, Ruda orchestrated the transformation of the conquered nations into colonies, vassal states, and an alliance under guerrillas' dominance. The crowning achievement awaited Ruda as he ascended to the paramount position, assuming the title of Datu, a term originating from the language of the guerrillas. In this context, it carried the specific meaning of eternal emperor. The title was not just a symbol of his supreme and enduring authority over the united continent, it was a declaration of the permanence and timelessness of Ruda's reign. As Datu, Ruda stood as the unchallenged and eternal ruler, marking a significant departure from the democratic principles that once governed the continent. The transition from democracy to autocracy was swift and decisive. The remaining presidential titles across the lands retained a semblance of their former selves, although the true authority now rested in the central government appointed by the Datu. Democracy, once a beacon of collective decision-making and equality, crumbled beneath the weight of Ruda's absolute rule. The principle of the minority submitting to the majority became a distant memory as Ruda's centralized authority left no room for dissent. The ideals of government by the people, exercised through free elections, were supplanted by an unyielding throne, crushing any murmurs of opposition. In the wake of conquest, the once vibrant political landscape became a barren wasteland, devoid of opposition or dissent. Dissenters were swiftly dealt with, their voices silenced through intimidation, imprisonment, or worse. Civil liberties were curtailed, the rule of law became a mere facade, serving only to legitimize Ruda's authoritarian regime. And the promises of peace and prosperity touted by Ruda's regime were quickly overshadowed by the harsh realities of oppression and subjugation. Yet, amid this landscape of fear and repression, something extraordinary began to take root. Across the conquered territories, the people grappled with the reality of life under guerrillist rule. The resistance movements that sprang up across the continent were fueled by the flames of discontent and the desire for freedom. However, where direct confrontation proved futile, a different form of protest emerged, one that was silent, yet powerful in its defiance. In cities and towns across the continent, the people began to organize silent protests. These were not marches or rallies, but quiet, collective acts of resistance. On designated days, entire communities would cease their activities. Shops would close their doors, workers would stay home, and the streets would fall eerily silent. The absence of sound became a deafening cry of defiance, a stark contrast to the oppressive noise of Ruda's regime. In the capital of a recently conquered state, the silent protest took the form of a day of mourning. Thousands of people dressed in black and stood in the public square, their heads bowed, a sea of silent, grieving faces. No words were spoken, no banners were raised, but the message was clear. The people had not forgotten what they had lost, and they would not accept their fate in silence. Ruda's enforcers, accustomed to quashing riots and rebellions with brute force, found themselves baffled by this new form of resistance. How could they silence a protest that made no noise? How could they arrest those who merely chose to stand still? The silent protest spread, growing in scale and frequency. In some places, entire cities participated, their streets empty and quiet, a haunting reminder of the power of collective action. For Ruda, these silent protests were a disturbing development. He had crushed armies and conquered nations, yet here was a form of resistance he could not easily eradicate. The silence of the people was a mirror held up to his rule, reflecting the emptiness and despair he had sown. Despite the veneer of strength and stability, cracks began to form in the facade, as whispers of dissent grew louder and the flames of rebellion threatened to engulf the continent once more. In the hallowed halls of his palace, Ruda pondered the future of the continent under his rule. The burden of responsibility weighed heavily upon his shoulders as he grappled with the consequences of his actions and the legacy he would leave behind. The silent protests were more than just acts of defiance. They were a symptom of a deeper discontent, a sign that his rule was not as absolute as he had believed. As Datu, Ruda wielded power unmatched by any who came before him, yet the weight of that power bore heavily upon his soul. The echoes of his conquests reverberated through the annals of history, leaving an indelible mark on the continent and its people. But for all his victories, Ruda found himself haunted by a single question: was it truly power that he had sought, or had it always been something more? And if it was more, what had he become in his pursuit of it? As the sun set on another day in the guerrillist empire, Ruda stood alone at the pinnacle of power, a solitary figure bathed in the fading light of a dying democracy. The future of the continent lay in his hands, as he grappled with the weight of his decisions and the ghosts of his past. And as the world watched with bated breath, the fate of a continent hung in the balance, poised on the edge of a new era under the rule of the eternal emperor. The dark veil of authority. As the once vibrant tapestry of democracy unraveled, a dictatorship emerged, casting a dark shadow over Ruda's dominion. In the heart of this autocracy, the leader, now known as the Datu, wielded unparalleled powers, unburdened by constraints or limitations. The corridors of politics were reshaped, and the National Assembly, once a bastion of collective decision-making, now stood as a mere symbol, its influence erased from the governance landscape. Dictatorships, with their centralized authority, became the hallmark of Ruda's regime. The internal elite, consisting of advisors, generals, and high-ranking officials, danced to the tunes orchestrated by the Datu. Politics unfolded within this closed circle, where loyalty was rewarded and dissent met ruthless suppression. The metamorphosis orchestrated by Ruda stripped the National Assembly of its pivotal role, rendering it a hollow shell devoid of any substantive power. The echoes of parliamentary debates were replaced by the resounding authority of the Datu, whose rule became an unchallenged force. Ruda reveled in the glory he built upon the shaky foundations of faith. The title of Datu, echoing the rulers of ancient civilizations, marked a departure from the democratic ideals that had once guided the nations. The clash between two civilizations, separated by millennia of evolution and distinct species and cultures, cast an unbridgeable chasm over Ruda's realm. Yet, the more he sought to emulate the ancient rulers, the more disconnected he became from the people who now lived under his iron grip. The National Assembly, once teeming with the energy of debate and the clashing of ideas, had become an empty theater. The seats that once held representatives from across the continent now stood vacant or were filled by loyalists who parroted the Datu's decrees without question. The vibrant discussions that had shaped policies and influenced the direction of nations were silenced, replaced by the hollow echo of a single voice, Ruda's. Beneath the veneer of imposed order, the embers of resistance smoldered, patiently awaiting the spark that would set them ablaze. The dichotomy between the ancient emulation and the modern society's evolved principles fanned the flames of discontent. The people, once active participants in the political arena, found themselves relegated to the sidelines, their voices muffled but not silenced. In the taverns and markets, and hushed conversations behind closed doors, the people spoke of what had been lost: freedom, autonomy, and the right to shape their own destinies. The smoldering resistance, a silent force, bided its time, aware that the seeds of rebellion were sown in the hearts of those who yearned for the restoration of their autonomy. The stage was set for a confrontation, as the rigid dictatorship of Ruda faced a brewing storm of opposition, a storm that, when unleashed, would test the very foundations of his iron rule. As Ruda basked in the trappings of power, his grip on the continent tightened with each passing day. The Datu's decrees became law, and dissent was swiftly quelled by the iron fist of his regime. The once vibrant cities now echoed with the hollow footsteps of fear, their inhabitants cowed into submission by the specter of retribution. Curfews were imposed, and the streets emptied long before nightfall, leaving the cities to the patrols of armored enforcers who ensured that no one dared challenge the Datu's rule. But amid the oppressive atmosphere, whispers of resistance began to circulate, spreading like wildfire through the underground networks that spanned the continent. Small acts of defiance, once inconsequential, now posed a threat to the Datu's authority, igniting the flames of rebellion in the hearts of the oppressed. Graffiti began to appear on the walls of cities, bold messages scrawled in defiance of the regime. Leaflets calling for resistance were slipped under doors, passed in secret from hand to hand. The underground presses worked tirelessly, producing pamphlets and manifestos that spoke of a future free from tyranny. In the dark alleys and hidden corners of the cities, secret meetings were held, where dissenters plotted the downfall of the tyrant who held their fate in his hands. The resistance, fueled by a collective desire for freedom, grew stronger with each passing day, its ranks swelling with disillusioned citizens who yearned for a return to the principles of democracy and justice. Teachers, students, workers, and former politicians, people from all walks of life, found common cause in their opposition to Ruda's regime. They were united by the belief that one day, the continent would be free again. Meanwhile, in the ivory towers of power, the Datu remained oblivious to the growing unrest, his confidence bolstered by the illusion of invincibility. Surrounded by sycophants and yes-men, he believed himself to be untouchable, blind to the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. His advisors, eager to maintain their favor, shielded him from the realities outside the palace walls, feeding him only what he wanted to hear. In their reports, the continent was at peace, the people content, and any rumors of dissent were dismissed as the grumblings of a few malcontents. But even the mightiest of empires are built on fragile foundations, and beneath the veneer of strength, cracks began to appear. Dissension simmered within the ranks of the elite, as whispers of treachery and betrayal threatened to undermine the Datu's authority from within. Ambitious generals and high-ranking officials, sensing the shifting tides, began to question their loyalties. They saw in the growing unrest an opportunity to seize power for themselves, to carve out a piece of the empire before it crumbled entirely. As the tension mounted and the stakes grew higher, Ruda found himself faced with a choice: cling to power at any cost or heed the warnings of history and relinquish his iron grip on the continent. But pride and arrogance blinded him to the inevitable reckoning that loomed on the horizon. The Datu could not see the cracks in his empire, nor could he hear the whispers of rebellion that grew louder with each passing day. In the end, Ruda chose to tighten his grip, doubling down on the repressive measures that had kept him in power. But in doing so, he only hastened the collapse of the very foundations he sought to protect. The resistance, once a scattered collection of discontented citizens, coalesced into a formidable force, ready to challenge the Datu's rule. And so, as the world watched with bated breath, the fate of a continent hung in the balance, poised on the edge of a new era. The storm of opposition that had long been brewing finally broke, unleashing a wave of resistance that would test the limits of Ruda's power and the resolve of those who stood against him. The Datu, once untouchable, now found himself standing on the precipice, the future of his empire uncertain, and the shadows of his past decisions closing in around him. The winds of change. After more than 3 years of Ruda's authoritarian rule, the peak of his dictatorship cast a pall over the land. Illegal arrests became commonplace, and dissenters found themselves imprisoned without trial. Ruda, once celebrated as a war hero, struggled to transition into the role of a peacetime leader. The suffering of the people, hidden from the official reports reaching Ruda, unveiled a stark contrast between his wartime prowess and his ineptitude in governance. To be a proficient leader in times of peace, Ruda lacked the essential qualities and skills required for effective governance. Leadership, management, decision-making, communication, motivation, and the ability to handle crises were all crucial aspects missing from Ruda's repertoire. His expertise lay on the battlefield, and the realm of politics eluded him. The strategies that had brought him victory in war could not address the complexities of ruling a nation in peace. The people, burdened by the weight of Ruda's rule, yearned for a transformative figure to emerge, a leader capable of reshaping their future and reinstating the democracy that had once graced the continent. The anticipation for change rippled through the hearts of citizens across all nations. In this time of uncertainty, a spiritual fulcrum was sought to help guide them through hardships, connect communities, and offer a vision beyond immediate challenges. The search for purpose and understanding, the quest for a greater perspective on life and the future, pointed towards the need for a unifying force, the religion they longed for. The void left by the collapse of democratic ideals created a deep longing for something that could fill the emptiness, something that could offer hope and a sense of direction in a world turned upside down. Yet, Within this dark period, a glimmer of hope emerged in the form of Kodo. An outstanding individual, Kodo was recognized as the light at the end of the tunnel. He was not just a symbol of hope, but a tangible force, a leader with the potential to guide the people through the storm. Kodo, a distinguished major general and son of former President Natsu, had risen from the ashes of adversity to become a beacon for the downtrodden masses. His lineage was one of leadership, and his own accomplishments in the military had solidified his reputation as a man of integrity, courage, and vision. Kodo's rise to prominence was a response to the growing despair under Ruda's rule. His words carried weight, his actions spoke volumes, and his unwavering commitment to justice inspired those who had long languished under Ruda's tyranny. Unlike Ruda, whose strength was in commanding armies, Kodo's strength lay in his ability to connect with the people, to understand their struggles, and to articulate a vision for a better future. As whispers of Kodo's influence spread, the anticipation for a new beginning, a return to democracy, and the prospect of a brighter future gained momentum among the people. As the days stretched into weeks and the weeks into months, the oppressive atmosphere under Ruda's rule showed no signs of abating. Illegal arrests continued unabated, and dissenters disappeared into the depths of prisons, their voices silenced by the iron fist of the dictator. Fear had become a constant companion for the people, and the cities that had once buzzed with life now seemed cloaked in an eerie silence. Kodo knew that his path to leadership was fraught with peril. Ruda's spies lurked in every shadow, his agents of oppression ready to crush any dissent with ruthless efficiency. To challenge Ruda's authority was to invite certain death, and Kodo was fully aware that the road ahead would be paved with danger and sacrifice. Yet, despite the risks, Kodo remained undeterred. His conviction burned bright, his resolve unshakable. He knew that the time for change had come, that the people were ready to rise up and reclaim their destiny. Kodo understood that his first task was to rally support from all corners of the continent. He began a journey that took him from the bustling cities to the most remote villages, spreading his message of hope and liberation to all who would listen. His voice echoed in the hearts of those who had lost faith, rekindling their belief in a future free from Ruda's oppressive rule. Kodo's message was simple but powerful. The people deserved to live in a society where their voices mattered, where justice prevailed, and where freedom was not just a distant memory but a reality they could reclaim. And with each passing day, Kodo's following grew stronger. The people rallied behind him, united in their desire for change. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they also knew that they could not afford to remain silent any longer. The time for action had come, and Kodo stood ready to lead the charge. With the support of the people behind him, he knew that anything was possible. The tide of history was turning, and the winds of change were blowing in his favor. As Kodo's influence spread, the continent began to stir. The oppressive weight of Ruda's rule, once seemingly unshakable, began to crack under the pressure of a population awakening to the possibility of freedom. Kodo's name became synonymous with the hope of a new era, and his leadership offered a vision of a future that was not dictated by fear, but guided by justice and democracy. The rise of Kodo marked the beginning of a new chapter in the continent's history. The era of Ruda's darkness was coming to an end, and the dawn of a new day was on the horizon. The people, once beaten down by tyranny, now stood with renewed strength, ready to fight for their freedom. Kodo, the son of Natsu and the embodiment of hope, was poised to lead them into this new era, a future where democracy could be restored, and the dreams of the people could once again become reality. The winds of change were blowing, and with Kodo at the helm, the continent was ready to embrace its destiny.
Track with the haunting melody from echoing synths to a driving beat with a driving bass. Don't stop the deep house track with the haunting